He didn't pray out loud. Never had. Somewhere in his bones, he believed God listened better to silence. That was just the kind of man Walker was. Quiet, solid, tired. His ranch sat a mile off the main road, the wind tugging at the tin roof and the creak of the porch swaying his only company most days. Never married. No kids. And maybe that was the part that gnawed at him worst when the nights got long. The hollow parts of a life that never filled in right. He buried his mother 10 winters ago, and his father long before that. Time passed like dry wind on a fence post, whittling things down until there was just him and the land. Cows to feed, a well that always needed fixing, and a dog too old to bark at strangers. He didn't ask for much, never did. But sometimes, when he sat on that porch late into the evening, looking out toward the hills, his chest would ache in a way that had no words. And that's when he'd think the closest thing to a prayer. Not spoken, not even really shaped, just a deep wanting for something to make the weight lighter. That morning, the air was cool, and the sky held the kind of stillness that came before trouble. He was carrying a sack of feed from the barn when he saw her. Just like that. A woman, on his porch, holding a baby. She wasn't crying, wasn't even rocking the child, just sitting stiff-backed like she'd forgotten how to rest. Her dress was dirty, the hem torn and stiff with road dust, hair tied back in a way that looked like she did it in the dark. And that baby, wrapped tight in a blanket so thin it barely counted. Both of them just there. Walker stopped short. He didn't move, didn't call out. For a second, he wondered if he was seeing things, like the time he'd gone 3 days without sleep during calving season and swore he saw his mother standing in the pasture. But she turned her head, met his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, the word dry in his throat. "You all right?" She blinked like the sound startled her. Took her a second to answer. "I didn't know where else to go." That was all she said. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't look away. And Walker, well, he didn't know what the hell to say to that. What else did someone say when a stranger with a baby just showed up on your land? He set the feed down slow, kept his distance. "You need a doctor?" he asked. She shook her head. "You hurt." Another shake. "Someone after you?" I got a pause. Her eyes flicked past him toward the road behind the barn. Then back to him. "No, not anymore." He didn't like the sound of that. But something in the way she said it made him believe it was true. "All right," he said after a beat. "Well, I got coffee inside." She looked down at the baby then, touched the edge of the blanket like she was checking if it was still breathing. "We could sit a while," he added. She nodded. Not quick, not eager, just once like it took work to agree to anything. Walker stepped up the porch, held the door open. She followed, and he noticed in how stiff she walked. Not like someone weak, but like someone bracing for the next blow. The kitchen smelled like dust and with smoke. He moved slow, set the kettle on the stove, filled it from the pitcher he'd drawn that morning. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask the baby's either. Just poured the coffee, slid the chipped mug across the table. She didn't touch it. He sat across from her, hands wrapped around his own cup, eyes on hers. "You can stay here today," he said. She didn't answer. "There's a cot in the back room. Clean blankets." Still nothing. Then softly, she whispered, "Thank you." The baby stirred and let out a whimper. She pulled him, or her, he couldn't tell, tighter, resting her cheek on the little head. And in that moment, something in Walker's chest cracked. It didn't break, just gave a little, like a window catching a gust of wind. He knew pain when he saw it, knew what it looked like when someone held it close and didn't talk about it. He'd seen it in the eyes of men coming back from war, in women after the storms took everything. He'd seen it in the mirror, too, on the nights he sat with nothing but silence and the echo of everything he never said. He didn't ask again, not that day. Instead, he made stew with what he had, cut up the last carrots from the root cellar, heated a loaf of bread. She didn't say much while they ate, just fed the baby a little from a bottle she pulled from her satchel. Her hands shook when she held it, not from fear, from something deeper, something old. That night, she slept in the back room. He laid extra quilts on the floor and left a lantern burning low outside her door. The house was still, but Walker didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the moonlight on the floor, thinking about how fast things change. One moment, your life is nothing but chores and silence. The next, there's a girl with hollow eyes in your kitchen and a baby in your home. And somehow, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like something he'd been waiting on without knowing it. Morning came. The rooster hollered. The wind picked up again, and Walker found himself frying eggs and thinking about whether she liked them soft or hard. She didn't say, just ate slow, eyes heavy with exhaustion. But when she looked up at him over the rim of her cup, something was different. A crack in the wall she kept around her. Small but real. "I'm Sarah," she said. He nodded once. "Walker." She gave a soft, almost smile. "The baby's name is Evan." Walker looked at the little bundle resting in a makeshift cradle, a drawer lined with towels. The baby made a soft noise, half a yawn, half a sigh, like it trusted the quiet. "You running from something, Sarah?" he asked. Not harsh, not pushy, just steady. Her eyes dropped to the table. Fingers tightened around the mug. "I was," she said. He waited. "But he's gone now." There was no relief in her voice. No victory. Just a flat, aching tired. Walker didn't ask who he was. Didn't need to. The way she flinched when the door creaked. The way her eyes scanned the tree line every few minutes. It told him enough. Whoever he was, he left scars too deep to see. "Don't worry," Walker said quietly. "Ain't no one to find you here." She looked up. Something sharp in her eyes softened for the first time. Not trust exactly, but maybe the start of it. And in that moment, as the baby cooed and the wind rattled the windows, Walker realized something. This wasn't just a woman seeking shelter. This was an answer to prayers he never dared speak, to loneliness he never dared name. And he knew, as sure as the sun would rise again, that nothing in his life was going to be the same. Sarah didn't speak much in the first week, but Walker learned to read the pauses between her words. She moved around the house like a ghost, careful, quiet, always watching. She never asked for anything, folded the blankets every morning, cleaned up after breakfast, and rocked Evan in long, slow motions as if the rhythm could stop her own mind from racing. Walker let her be. He understood that kind of silence. The kind that wasn't just about fear, it was about surviving. But even ghosts leave footprints, and soon, Sarah's presence started changing things. The house didn't feel so still anymore. There were bottles drying by the sink, a soft hum from the back room when she thought no one could hear. The faint smell of baby powder mixed in with dust and with smoke. And slowly, people noticed. It was Clary who asked first. She ran the dry goods store down in Jasper Creek and had known Walker since he was a boy. Tough as nails, twice as sharp. Walker stopped by for flour and nails, and she squinted at the list like it didn't add up. "You feeding someone else?" she asked without looking up. Walker grunted, which she took as a yes. "She staying long?" He didn't answer. Clary said, tapping her pencil on the counter. "You're gonna need more milk powder. Word got around quick in a town like Jasper Creek." Sarah had only been there once. Rode into town beside Walker in the wagon, holding Evan close against her chest, eyes scanning every corner like trouble could come from behind a sack of feed. She didn't speak a word, but her presence spoke plenty. Young woman, tired eyes, carrying a baby that didn't look older than 3 months. No ring, no name given, and riding with Walker, the most unspoken man west of the river. It didn't take long for questions to rise like smoke. The first real stir came from Mary Beth Langley, whose husband ran the post office. She came out of the chapel one Sunday, leaned toward Clary, and said too loudly, "Well, I think it's sweet. The Lord sends you what you need when you least expect it." Clary had only snorted, but not everyone was gentle about it. "You taking in strays now?" asked Everett Miller, a rancher known more for his whiskey breath than his cows. Walker didn't answer, just stared until Everett mumbled something and walked off. Still, the town buzzed. No one really knew Sarah. and Walker's silence just made them speculate more. Some figured she was a runaway. Others thought she was a widow. A few whispered things darker than that. Back at the ranch, Sarah didn't ask about what people thought, but she felt it. The stares, the long silences when she entered the general store, the forced smiles that didn't reach the eyes. She wasn't new to judgment. She'd lived in it for years. But this felt different, quieter, and somehow heavier. "Folks talk," she said one night as Walker stirred the fire. "Let him," he answered. She looked down at Evan, who was sleeping with one hand curled tight near his cheek. "Doesn't bother you?" Walker didn't answer right away. He sat back in his chair, boots near the hearth, arms folded. "Most folks have their own hurt to cover," he said finally. "Talking about others makes theirs feel smaller." She thought about that a long while. That week, Clary came by the ranch unannounced, claiming she had extra soap from a shipment. Couldn't sell it, she said, though Walker knew better. She stood on the porch, hands on her hips, looking Sarah over like a tailor measuring a dress. "You know how to sew?" Clary asked. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Good. You can help me patch up the altar cloths. Been torn since winter." It wasn't a question. Clary turned on her heel and left the soap by the door. Sarah stood still a moment, then picked up the bundle and nodded once to Walker. He didn't say anything, but a hint of something flickered across his face. Maybe relief, maybe respect. Then there was Jonah, Walker's old friend from the neighboring ranch, a widower with 2 grown boys. He came by on Sundays to play cards or talk cattle prices. Jonah had never been one to pry, but even he noticed the shift. "She's out of quiet about expertos her," Jonah said one afternoon as they stood watching the cattle move through the east pasture. Walker nodded. "She's staying?" Walker didn't answer. Jonah spat into the grass, then glanced toward the house, where Sarah was hanging sheets with Evan swaddled in a sling across her chest. "She reminds me of Beth," Jonah said, his voice low. "When we first got married. Always listening, never saying too much. Took me years to learn she was carrying more than I could ever fix." Walker looked down at the dust on his boots, then up again. "She don't need fixing," he said. Jonah clapped a hand on his shoulder. Didn't say she did, but tension had its own way of crawling back. It came first in the form of a letter. Walker didn't get much mail, so when the postmaster handed him an envelope with no return address, it stood out. The handwriting was rushed, heavy. Inside, just one line: "You can't keep her from me." He read it 3 times before folding it back into the envelope and sliding it into his coat pocket. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but something deeper, protective, darker. He didn't tell Sarah, but that night he checked every window, bolted the doors, sat up long after the fire died. He didn't sleep. Days passed. He said nothing, but the worry changed the way he moved. Sarah noticed it first when she caught him looking out the window too often. Once, she heard him mutter something while reloading a rifle she hadn't seen before. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Walker looked at her for a long time. "Just stay close to the house," he said. She didn't ask again, just nodded, the way someone does when they've lived through worse. A few nights later, Evan cried more than usual. Sarah rocked him in the corner of her room, whispering soft things. Walker stood in the hallway listening, not to the baby, but to her voice. And he realized he didn't know anything about her before now. Not her favorite season, not her parents' names, not what kind of music made her smile. All he knew was this version, guarded, worn down, mother before anything else. And it hit him how little people really saw of each other. How many lives lived just under the surface. The next day, Walker took her out to the far fence line, showed her the boundaries of the land, the safe places, where the creek bent behind the oak grove. She followed him quietly, Evan tucked close in a shawl. "Place feels like it's holding its breath," she said suddenly. Walker looked at her. "You ever feel that?" she added. "Like something's coming, and you don't know if it's good or bad. Just heavy." He nodded once. "Yeah, I do." Then he did something he hadn't done since she came. He told her about his sister. Her name was Anna. She ran off at 17, pregnant by a boy who never meant to stay. Their father never spoke her name again. 2 years later, word came she died in a cold boarding house up north. Walker had never forgiven himself for not finding her sooner. Sarah said nothing, just reached over, gently placed a hand on his sleeve. And that touch, that single quiet gesture, broke something open in both of them. By the time they returned to the house, the sky had turned to gold and gray. Sarah looked back over the fields, her eyes softer than they'd been in weeks. But even in that calm, the storm waited. The next day, Walker found footprints near the back fence. Too large to be his. Not fresh, but recent enough. He didn't tell Sarah. Not yet. But the air grew heavier with each passing night. And Sarah, who once seemed like a ghost, now felt more like a flame. Steady, quiet, but unmistakably alive. Whatever came next, Walker knew one thing. This wasn't just a woman passing through. She belonged to the land now. And someone out there meant to tear that piece apart. The days grew longer, and the land softened with the promise of spring. Cold winds still came at night, but the afternoons held a kind of warmth that settled deep into the bones. Sarah had been on Walker's ranch nearly a month, and though neither of them said it outright, there was a quiet understanding between them now. Her steps were no longer cautious. She moved like someone who had begun to believe the ground beneath her wouldn't give out. Evan, too, was changing. He no longer cried through the night. His cheeks grew rounder, his little hands stronger. Sarah carried him in the sling across her chest as she walked the fence lines or helped Clary stitch altar cloths in the chapel. Sometimes, when the baby was napping, Sarah sat on the porch with her bare feet tucked beneath her, mending Walker's shirts or simply staring at the hills as if trying to remember how to breathe without fear. Walker noticed everything. The way she touched Evan's head with a gentleness he hadn't known existed. The way her lips parted in surprise when he brought her wildflowers from the pasture. The way her eyes grew less guarded when the sun hit them just right. He didn't speak his thoughts. He never had been the kind to say more than needed. But he did what he could to show her. He built her a cradle out of pine, left her favorite tea on the table before dawn, fixed the lock on her door without being asked. These weren't grand gestures. They were small, almost invisible, but they were his way of saying, "You matter. You're safe." One morning, Sarah found him working the fence line near the north pasture. Evan was asleep, so she walked out with a basket of lunch she'd pack herself: bread, cheese, dried apples. She stood watching him a moment before calling out. He turned, surprised, then smiled. A rare, unguarded kind of smile that made her chest ache. "You didn't have to bring that," he said. "I wanted to." They sat under a cottonwood tree, eating in silence. The sky above them stretched wide and blue. A breeze carried the smell of wild sage and new grass. After a while, Sarah spoke softly. "I haven't laughed in a long time." Walker glanced at her. "You laughed last night." "That was different," she said. "That was small. I mean the kind of laugh that makes your ribs hurt. The kind that feels like you might cry after." He nodded slowly, eyes on the horizon. "You will," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I've heard your silence." And it's starting to sound lighter. She didn't respond, but she reached over and touched his hand, just once before pulling away. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Walker built a small fire out by the barn. Sarah brought a blanket, and they sat with Evan between them, wrapped and sleepy. The flames cracked softly, and the air smelled of smoke and clover. "I was 16 when I ran," Sarah said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. "He was older, said he loved me, said all the things I wanted to hear because no one ever had." Walker didn't interrupt. He got mean when I told him about Evan. Started saying things that didn't make sense. Things about ownership, about me not knowing how good I had it. She took a breath. I left in the middle of the night. No shoes. Just him and me in a sling. Walker's jaw tightened. He wanted to ask more, about the bruises he'd noticed fading from her arms, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, but he didn't. He just waited. "I didn't think we'd make it," she said. "The night I found your porch, I was going to leave Evan wrapped up there and walk into the woods. She paused, looked down, but then you opened the door. Walker didn't speak. He just leaned forward and tossed another log into the fire. But his hands were trembling. The next day, Clary stopped by again, this time with a bundle of fabric and a quiet smile. "Time to make you a dress, sweetheart," she told Sarah. "Something that ain't falling apart." Sarah hesitated, but Clary added, "It's a gift. For Easter." Sarah nodded, her eyes misting. "Thank you." And for the first time, Walker saw her accept help without apology. That week brought more small moments. Jonah came by with seeds for the spring garden. Sarah planted tomatoes and squash with him while Evan played in the dirt beside them. Walker watched from the porch, struck by how naturally she moved through the tasks, how easily she laughed when Jonah made some dry remark about his old knees. At night, Sarah started reading aloud from the Bible Walker kept on the shelf. Evan would fall asleep to the sound of her voice. Sometimes, she'd read from one of Clary's old novels instead, and Walker would sit nearby, pretending not to listen even as he waited for each next line. Then came the letter. Another one. Same handwriting. No return address. "You think you're safe. You're not. I'll find you." Walker burned it in the stove before Sarah could see it. But he doubled the locks again, started keeping his rifle loaded in the barn, his revolver under the mattress. He didn't tell Sarah about this letter either, but the worry followed him like a shadow. A few days later, while fixing the wheel on the wagon, he heard Sarah singing. Just a little tune, soft and low. Evan cooed in response. Walker froze, hammer in hand. She hadn't sung before. Not once. And the sound of it, fragile, steady, full of something close to hope, made him want to drop the hammer and hold them both. Instead, he tightened the last bolt and went inside. That night, while drying dishes, Sarah looked over and said, "You've been quiet." Walker smirked faintly. "Ain't that always the case?" "Quieter than usual." He shrugged. "Just tired." She watched him a long moment, then said, "I know something's wrong." He shook his head. "It's fine." "No," she said. "You're protecting me from something. I can feel it." He didn't respond, and the silence between them grew thick. Finally, Sarah set down the dish towel. "You have to tell me if we're in danger." Walker turned, eyes darker than she'd seen in weeks. "I won't let him near you," he said. "That's all you need to know." She flinched, but not from the words, from the weight behind them. From a storm building, just behind his calm. A knock came on the door the next morning. Loud, fast. Walker answered with his revolver hidden behind his back. It was Sheriff Hollis. He stepped inside, hat in hand. "Walker, we need to talk." Sarah stood frozen near the stairs, Evan asleep in her arms. Sheriff Hollis looked over at her, then back at Walker. "Someone came into town last night," he said quietly. "A skit about a girl with a baby." Sarah's face went white. Walker stepped between them. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Sent him off. Said you don't take visitors." Hollis looked past him again. "But he'll be back." Walker nodded once. That evening, Sarah didn't eat. She paced the house, holding Evan close, double-checking every window. Walker sat near the fire, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she did. "You should have let me go weeks ago." "No, I'll bring trouble. You brought life." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. He's not someone who gives up." Walker stood and crossed to her, eyes burning. "Neither am I." She looked up at him, tears falling now, her jaw trembling. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "He's all I have." Walker reached out and cupped the back of her head, pulling her close until her forehead rested against his chest. "You're not alone anymore," he said. And she believed him. Maybe for the first time in her life, she believed someone meant it. The next day, he saddled his horse and rode into town. Met with Hollis. Gave him the letter he'd kept in his coat. Hollis read it, jaw tight. "We'll post someone up the road," he said. "If he shows, we'll stop him." But Walker knew better than to count on lawmen. That night, he sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap. Sarah joined him after Evan fell asleep. She sat beside him, hands in her lap. "I was never good at trusting," she said. I'm not good at talking. They both laughed quietly. You think we'll be all right? She asked. Walker didn't answer right away, but then he looked at her, really looked. And in the flicker of the porch light, he saw not the broken girl who arrived weeks ago, but a woman who had fought her way through fire and still held love like a shield. We already are, he said, and in the stillness that followed, she reached over and held his hand. Fingers tangled together, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they were waiting for the next storm. They were walking through it, together. The storm came in the middle of the night. Not rain, not thunder, but the kind that crawls under your skin and settles there. Sarah woke with her heart pounding before she even understood why. Evan stirred beside her, soft and unaware, still in the safety of dreams. But she knew something had shifted, something invisible but loud. She slipped from the bed and crept down the hallway barefoot, past the fire now only embers in the hearth. Walker wasn't in the chair by the front window. The rifle was gone. Panic rose fast and sharp. Her hand trembled as she opened the door, letting in the chill of early dawn. There by the barn she saw him, standing still, rifle down by his side, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the edge of the woods. She didn't have to ask. She saw the footprints. Fresh, deep. He turned when he heard her steps and met her eyes with a look she hadn't seen in weeks. That hard, distant stare he wore like armor. He was here, he said. Just that. Nothing more. She felt her knees go weak. Not from fear, but from the weight of how much she wanted to believe they'd finally escaped. Walker across the yard, placed his hands on her arms. I didn't want you to find out like this, he said. You knew. I got letters. Burned them. Didn't want you scared. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Her whole body went cold. So you decided for me. His hands dropped. That cut deeper than he expected. I was trying to protect you. Sarah stepped back. You don't get to decide how I live with fear. I've done that my whole life. The hurt in her voice echoed between them. Walker stood still, knowing he'd crossed the line and not knowing how to cross back. Inside, Evan cried. Sarah turned, disappearing into the house. The door shut behind her with more finality than a slammed gate. That day passed heavy and quiet. Sarah barely spoke. Walker didn't force it. He worked the fields like usual, but every chore felt hollow, like the rhythm had broken. She cooked dinner and left it covered on the stove. He ate alone. That night, she sat on the porch long after he went to bed, staring out toward the same woods that had once meant shelter. Now, they meant danger again. She clutched Evan's small hand as he slept in her arms, her own thoughts spiraling inward. It wasn't just fear of the man who hunted her. It was deeper, a fear that safety didn't really exist, that peace was borrowed time. She feared she'd ruined what little light they'd built here. She feared Walker might resent her now, that the quiet understanding between them had cracked wide open and couldn't be repaired. But most of all, she feared she would never truly belong anywhere. By the third day, the silence between them had grown too loud. Walker stood in the barn, hands covered in grease from fixing a gear. Sarah came to the doorway, barefoot, arms crossed. Her eyes were red but clear. I'm sorry, she said. Walker turned slowly. You don't have to be. I do. I was scared, and I lashed out. He wiped his hands on a rag, walked toward her. I didn't trust you enough to carry that truth with me, he admitted. That was my mistake. She looked up, searching his face. Why didn't you tell me? Because if I said it out loud, it made it real. And I wanted to pretend we had more time. Sarah's lips parted, but she didn't speak. He reached up and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary. We can't outrun what's coming, she said. I know, but we don't have to face it apart. He nodded. It's still like that for a long time. Not speaking, just sharing the same breath, the same quiet hope that maybe, even now, they weren't too far gone. But peace never held long. That evening, Hollis returned. This time, he came with news that chilled the air more than any letter. He's in Jasper Creek. Saw him at the inn. He's asking questions. Said he's looking for his fiancée and son. Sarah's knees buckled. Walker caught her before she hit the floor. Hollis tipped his hat, offered quiet apologies, and left. She sat on the edge of the bed for hours after, holding Evan tighter than before. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. "He never saw Evan," she said, voice distant. "He never held him, never asked if he was okay. He only cared that I was his." Walker sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "He's not going to get near you," he said. "I don't know if I can survive seeing him again." "You don't have to. I'll be there." She looked at him, really looked, and what she saw there made her chest tighten. He wasn't just trying to save her. He needed her safe. It wasn't pity. It wasn't duty. It was something else. Something deeper. But she didn't know how to accept that yet. Not fully. Not when part of her still whispered that love like that couldn't last. Later that night, while Walker slept in the chair by the door, rifle on his lap, Sarah stood over Evan's cradle and cried. Quiet, desperate tears she'd held back for weeks. She wasn't crying for fear. She was crying because for the first time, she had something worth losing. And that made everything so much harder. By morning, the town was buzzing. Rumors had spread. Some believed she was a criminal, others that she was a runaway wife. Clary heard it all and said nothing. But when she brought over fresh milk and saw Sarah's face, she set the basket down and pulled her into a hard, mother-like hug. "I don't care what they say," she whispered. "You're mine now." Sarah wept in her arms. Meanwhile, Walker rode into town, saw him with his own eyes, tall, lean, dressed better than most in town, smooth-talking the innkeeper with a forced smile that never reached his eyes. Walker didn't confront him. Not yet. He rode home quiet, thinking. That night, he told Sarah the truth. He's here, and he's looking in all the wrong places. Sarah's hands went cold. "Let me talk to him," she said. Walker straightened. "Absolutely not. I need to end this. I need to look him in the eye and tell him I'm not his." Walker stepped forward. "You don't owe him that. I owe it to myself." There was steel in her voice. And Walker knew then he couldn't protect her from everything. She wasn't someone to be hidden behind locked doors. She was someone who had learned how to survive, and now she wanted to learn how to live. "I'll be right beside you," he said finally. She nodded. "I know." They rode into town the next morning. Walker held Evan while Sarah walked up the steps of the inn. Her heart pounded, her stomach twisted, but she didn't turn back. He was in the lobby, smiling at the clerk when she stepped in. The moment he saw her, his face changed. Surprise, then possession, then something cruel behind his grin. "There you are," he said. Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm not yours," she said, loud enough for the clerk to hear. The man took a step forward, arms out. "Come on, Sarah. You've had your little break." "I'm not yours," she repeated. "And I never was." His smile twitched. "Where's my son?" "He's not your son. He's mine, and he will never know your hands." That flicker of control slipped. His face twisted. But before he could speak again, Walker stepped through the door, rifle slung on his shoulder, baby in his arms. "You should leave," he said quietly. The man looked between them. Walker's calm strength, Sarah's steady eyes, the baby staring back with curiosity. And something in him broke. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just turned and walked out. Sarah stood frozen. Her hands were shaking, but her heart wasn't. She had faced him, and he had no power now. Outside, Walker helped her into the wagon. The wind picked up. Clouds gathered low. But her face held something new. Not fear. Not even relief. Strength. That night, they didn't speak much. They sat on the porch, fire cracking in the pit, Evan asleep in her lap. She leaned her head against Walker's shoulder. "I never thought I'd get to be this version of myself," she said. "You always were," he replied. And though neither of them said it, they knew something deep had shifted. Not just between them, inside them. They'd seen the storm, and they were still here. The next few days passed in a strange stillness. Not peace, but the kind of calm that settles just after lightning strikes before you know if the fire caught. The man was gone from town. Hollis sent a telegram to confirm he boarded the northbound train. But Sarah didn't exhale. Not completely. Part of her had learned to live in braced silence, waiting for the next shoe to drop. She tried to shake it. She helped Clary bake bread, rocked Evan under the willow tree, even laughed when Walker slipped on mud and cursed like the sky was listening. But something inside her stayed tight, like a knot that had never been untied. One evening, she found herself standing by the old oak fence, looking out toward the hills. The wind was soft, the light turning gold, and Evan was asleep upstairs in his cradle. Walker came to stand beside her, the air between them heavy with unspoken things. "He's not coming back," Walker said gently. "I know," she replied. But she didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the tree line, distant and blank. "You did something most folks never do," he continued. "You faced him, stared him down with nothing but the truth in your hands." Sarah was quiet for a long while. Then she whispered, "It didn't fix me." Walker didn't flinch. "It wasn't meant to, but it gave you the right to stop carrying what was never yours." She turned to him then, tears thick in her eyes. "He made me believe I was something broken, like I needed him to have worth. He twisted everything, made me ashamed to even want better." Walker stepped closer, voice low and firm. "And what do you want now?" Sarah opened her mouth, but didn't speak. Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, rough from chores, still bearing faint scars from the road. Her lip trembled. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've lived my whole life just trying not to get hurt." Walker reached for her hand, wrapping his larger fingers gently around hers. "That's surviving," he said. "Now you get to learn how to live." She looked up at him, this man who had said more with silence than anyone ever had with words. His face was steady, his eyes soft, and something in her chest cracked open for real this time. Not from pain, from release. That night, after Evan had fallen asleep, Sarah walked into Walker's room. Not with fear, not with hesitation. She stood in the doorway until he looked up from his chair. "Tell me about your sister," she said. Walker blinked, surprised. "Anna." She nodded. "You said she ran, that you never found her in time." He exhaled slowly and leaned back, folding his arms. She was light, the kind that made a place feel bigger when she was in it. Our father didn't know what to do with a girl who wanted to write poems and talk about dreams. He crushed her with rules and silence. She got pregnant when she was 17. Some boy from a mining camp. When she told him, he called her shameful. Said she'd embarrassed the family. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, listening quietly. She left that night. I tried to follow, but I was 18 and had nothing to offer her. By the time I found out where she was gone. His voice cracked. She died alone. Sarah's face was full of quiet ache. She didn't deserve that. "No," he said. "She didn't. I think about all the women like her." "Like me," Sarah whispered. "People don't know what it takes to keep going when everything's been taken from you." Walker looked up at her, the shadows long on his face. "I know what it takes," he said. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Sarah spoke again. "When I left him, I thought I'd ruined my life. I thought I was marked, not just by what he did, but by my own choices, by being foolish, by staying too long, by hoping he'd change. But I wasn't foolish. I was surviving." She stood, pacing slowly, her voice growing stronger. "I used to think Evan would grow up and see me as weak, that he'd think I ran because I couldn't fight. But now I know I fought the only way I could. I protected him by leaving." Walker stood too, and for a moment they faced each other in the dim room. Both changed, both carrying scars that no one could see unless they were looking closely. "You think I'm strong?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Walker didn't answer right away. He stepped forward and lifted her hand gently. "No," he said. "I know you are." She broke then, in the best way. Let the tears fall, not out of fear, but because she finally felt safe enough to feel everything she'd pushed down for years. Walker didn't speak. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tight, letting her sob against his chest. She shook with it, a storm leaving the body. But when it passed, she was still standing, still whole, still here. The next morning was still and blue. Sarah walked barefoot through the dewy grass, Evan in her arms, and found Walker fixing the fence post that leaned by the gate. "I want to build something," she said. He looked up. "I want to plant a real garden. Not just a few rows. A real one, with a fence around it, with flowers and beans and strawberries for Evan when he's older." Walker wiped his hands on his pants and smiled. "I'll help you." She smiled back, and it was the kind of smile that made her look like a woman fully returned to herself. That week, they started digging. Jonah came by to help mark the corners. Clary dropped off tomato starters and bags of seed. Even Hollis showed up one morning with a shovel and a sheepish grin. "I heard something about strawberries," he said. Everyone worked through the afternoons, breaking soil, laughing, telling stories. Sarah moved among them with ease now. She laughed easily. She joked back. She belonged. Late one afternoon, when the sun was beginning to fall behind the ridge and the air was thick with the smell of dirt and grass, Walker caught Sarah watching Evan roll in a pile of clover. She looked back at him, and something in her eyes was different. Free. That night, as they stood under the stars, Walker brushed a hand along her cheek. "You're not afraid anymore." She nodded. "I still remember. I still feel it. But I'm not running." She stepped closer. "I want to stop surviving. I want to start choosing." Walker took her face in his hands, gentle as the wind. "Then stay," he said. "Stay with me. I already have." They kissed under the open sky, slow and sure and without any fear left between them. And in that moment, neither of them felt like broken people patching themselves back together. They felt whole, together. For the first time, Sarah believed love didn't have to come with pain. And Walker believed prayers didn't have to be spoken to be heard. She had sat on his porch holding a baby once, unsure, scared, waiting to be turned away. Now, she stood beside him with open hands and a full heart. And they both knew they had walked through the fire and come out standing. The air turned warm as April gave way to May, and everything on the ranch softened with it. The soil smelled sweeter. The winds grew gentler. Days stretched long and slow, and nights settled like a soft quilt over the hills. Sarah woke each morning with Evan curled close against her chest and the hum of a new life stirring in her bones. It was the first time in years she didn't feel the need to flinch awake to listen for danger. Instead, she listened to birds, to the sound of Walker in the kitchen fixing coffee, to the quiet creak of the porch boards as he stepped outside to watch the sun rise. The garden took shape quickly, small rows bordered by stone and a fence Walker built by hand. Evan played nearby while Sarah planted the first sprouts of green. It wasn't just about food. It was about planting something that was hers, the start of a future she had chosen. One evening, after supper, she found Walker sitting on the edge of the porch steps, his hands resting loose on his knees, watching the fields like he always did. She came out barefoot, her hair down, and sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, shared, the kind that didn't need filling. Finally, she leaned against his shoulder and said, "I don't feel like I'm waiting to be chased anymore." Walker glanced down at her, eyes quiet, steady. "That's because no one's chasing you." She smiled, then took his hand and laced her fingers through his. "I want to stay, not just in a house, not just until Evan's older. I mean for real. I want a life here, with you." He turned to face her fully, reached up, and gently cupped her jaw. "Then stay." She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply nodded because the choice was hers, and that made all the difference. They married in June, quietly. Clary stitched her a dress of soft cream cotton, and Jonah stood beside Walker under the oak tree where they first shared lunch months ago. Evan toddled barefoot through the grass, clapping at the birds and the wind. No grand speeches. No guests beyond the few who had stood beside them when no one else would. Just a promise spoken through steady hands and steady hearts. That night, when the house was dark and still, Sarah sat in bed beside Walker, her hand resting over his heart. "You prayed for something once," she whispered. "Did you ever think it'd look like me?" He smiled, brushing a thumb along her knuckles. I didn't know what I was asking for. But yeah, I think I was asking for exactly this. She kissed him softly, like an answer. Outside, the wind rolled gently through the grass. Inside, a woman who had once run barefoot through the dark now rested easy. And a man who had once believed silence was safer than hope now laid beside the answer to prayers he never dared to speak aloud. Together, they built something quiet, steady, and whole. And it was enough.